Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Building Locations webinar. My name is Nick, and I will be doing the presentation with you today. Just like all of our previous webinars, everybody will be on mute. So if you do happen to have any questions at any point during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the questions area. And at the end of the class, I'll go through and answer any questions that may have come up. Also, at the end of the class, I will be sending out an email that will contain a PDF that will cover everything that we're talking about today. So that way you can try this out on your own. Should you happen to have any questions while doing that, you can contact our support department. You can reach them through either phone or email, and they will be happy to help you out with any questions you may have as well. So again, today's class is on building locations. So in today's class, we're going to go through some detailed information about the building locations in Envisioneer. We're going to be looking at understanding how the building locations work. We're then going to be looking at defining your building locations, adding in a new building location, and then for our building essentials and construction suite users, we'll be looking at specifying framing options for your walls as well. So first, let's talk about understanding building locations. So defining your building locations correctly is an important part of the design process in Envisioneer. The first thing you should do when starting a new project is define your building locations. So your building location settings determine the relation of each story to the grade, the height of your walls, the placement of floors and ceilings, the head heights of your doors, windows, and openings, as well as the framing specifications for your walls. When you draw walls or insert other elements such as your doors and windows, they are inserted on the current building location, which is selected using the View Control toolbar. So down here in the bottom, we can see we have our different locations based off of what we have defined in our building locations drop-down list. So we have a foundation, a ground floor, and a second floor here. By default, when you open a new Envisioneer project file, there are preset building locations, each of which has predefined settings. You can edit the settings of these existing building locations, or you can create new ones to suit your design needs. So let's look at defining a building location. So to take a look at the building locations and how we can define those, we're going to go up and we have two ways of selecting a building location. We can use the Settings Building Locations option. So we can go up to the menu and select Settings, and then select Building Locations. Or if you like to use the buttons that are right in your face on the screen, you can actually just select this little house in the bottom left-hand corner, and that will also bring up the building locations dialog. So again, the building locations dialog is located in the lower left with the button here, or by going to settings and selecting building locations. When you select either one of those options, the building locations dialog box will then list all the predefined building locations and their associated settings. So as we can see here, we have a couple of different columns and rows in here. So let's go through each of these and define what they are. So the first thing we're going to see is the number. So this is going to be just a numerical number that you can actually type in. That's a reference number for the building location you want to use. By default, we use 1, 2, 3 as ours. You can make these whatever you want them to be. So if you want to do a number sequence of 0, 0, 1, you can make this however you feel comfortable making your building locations being numbered. Next is the name. And the name is just going to be the building location's name. So as an example, you can see here we have foundation, ground floor, and second floor. If you add in additional locations, you'll be prompted to give a specific name for that building location. Next is our floor level. So this is going to be the height of the top of the floor base, so your subfloor and structural floor above grade. And grade level is going to be equal to 0. A positive value indicates a floor level above grade, where a negative value indicates a floor level below grade. We then have head heights. The head height is the height of the top of the window and wall openings relative to the floor level. So if you add in a window, how high do you want the top of that window to be based off of the floor level in your design. So again, by default, we have ours set up to be 6'8". Ceiling height is going to be the height of the underside of the ceiling surface relative to your floor level. So from the top of your floor to the underside of your ceiling, that's what that 8 foot represents. We then also have a wall height option, and the wall height option is the physical height of the wall on that building location. So again, this is from the top of the floor to the top of the wall, and ours is set to be 8'1" and 1/8". Another nice way to look at this is selecting the edit dialog, and you get an idea of how these locations are being set up based on the values that you're seeing. So here we can see the terrain or the grade level, and then we can see to the top of our floor. And that's where we're getting that 1 foot, 5.5 inches from. So from top of grade to top of floor is going to be 1 foot, 5.5 inches in this particular template. If you're doing a slab on grade construction, or if you're doing if you want to adjust this value, you can have a value in here that's going to be reflective of what type of construction you're going to be building with. So if you're doing a slab on grade, you're probably going to want this to be 4 or 6 inches high, depending on the thickness of the slab. Everything else is now going to be measured from the top of that floor to the top of the element we're talking about. So as an example, the top of floor to the top of the head height is going to be 6'8". So that's going to be from, again, your top of your floor to the top of that window is now that 6'8". The 8 foot is going to be to the underside of the ceiling, and then the 8'1" and 1/8" is going to be to the top of the wall itself. I'm going to click cancel on that. And the next thing we're going to look at is framing options. And this is only going to be available for our Building Essentials and Construction Suite users. And this determines how the walls on the building location are going to be framed. So if you select the little browse button next to that, you're going to get a location framing options dialog box. And in here you can control how you want certain walls and things to be framed. So you can control your load-bearing walls, your non-load-bearing walls, your intersection lookup table, your infill configuration, and then your framing rules. So the load-bearing span table is essentially just saying what type of framing configurations do you want for any load-bearing wall. So if you punch an opening into this wall, what type of header configuration are we going to be using? We have a couple of default options in here. We have a 2-ply and a 3-ply. We also have a truss joist, a log wall, and a steel stud span table. You can select whichever option you want. When you double click on those, they're going to give you different values. So here we're looking at the wall framing span table for a 3-ply span table. And again, you can create your own. So if you want to add in your own header configuration, you can do that. You can give it a new name, apply your own spans that you want to take advantage of. And again, essentially all this is saying is when I punch an opening into this wall and that opening is up to 5 feet in width, I want that to use a 3-ply 2x6 header. For any opening larger than a 5 foot up to an 8 foot, I want to use a 3-ply 2x8 header, and so on in that list. So you can add additional span openings, and you can add in your own configuration, head sill jam configuration that you want to take advantage of. To give you an understanding of what these actually are, I'm just going to select one of these options in here, and I'm going to select the 3-ply 2x8 header double sill. I'm going to click this little browse button. This will bring up the head sill jam library for that particular configuration that we've selected. If I double click on that, I'm just going to right click over here and I'm just going to change this into a rendered outline view. It'll just give us a better idea of what we're looking at. So essentially all this is it's a group of members that are going to configure to make up an opening span table. So I want to have, for this particular opening, double jacks and double kings on both sides of my opening. I then want a double sill, so it sits on 2 sills in my design, and I also want my header to sit on top of my jack studs. So I'm able to extend my headers to the ends of my king studs so they sit on top of my jack studs. I can double up my jacks, double up my kings, double up my sill. The other thing you're going to notice in here is the opening the cripple regions. So in the event that you have a window or a door, the cripple region will also be added in for you. If you're adding in a door, the lower cripple region is automatically removed. So you don't have to worry about doing that yourself. When it sees a door, it knows that it's not going to need a lower cripple region. So it will be automatically removed. The other thing we're seeing in here is our headers. And you'll notice that the headers look a little bit different. They're actually showing the material member, the member of the material itself. And that's because we're specifying an exact member. So if I look at the left jack stud or the left king stud, you'll notice that it says use member from, and it's specifying wall properties. This is again by design. So what we're saying here is whatever the wall is that's being added in, if it's a 2x4 or a 2x6 wall, I want to use the member that's assigned to that wall for the framing of this opening itself. So all of my jacks and all of my kings and my cripples and my sills are all going to use whatever the wall properties define. So again, either 2x4 or 2x6. However, when I look at my header, it's saying use member from, and we're specifying from the member library. So we're actually picking out a member from our member library to use as our header. And this is how we can denote a different size header in that particular wall. So it's no longer going to reference what the wall is using. It's saying use this specific member for this header. And you can make those adjustments, changing the size of the member if you want to. I'm just going to click cancel on that and cancel, cancel. I don't want to make any changes to this. And we can do the same thing for our non-load bearing span table. So we can go through and we've adjusted our load bearing span table. So any opening that we punch into a load bearing wall, we want to use a specific header. For any opening that we punch into a non-load bearing wall, like interior doors, we don't really need a header configuration above that. We can probably just get away with a 2x4 that's lying flat, but you can again adjust this accordingly depending on the type of configuration you want to use. The intersection lookup table is the next option in here, and that option is actually a reference. So whenever you insert something into your drawing area, and you have walls that actually butt up against each other, it sees what type of configuration that is, and it will apply its intersection for that particular style. So if you have two walls making a corner, it will apply a configuration for that. If you have three walls, it will find that configuration and apply an intersection for three walls, and so on. You can adjust it after it's been inserted. So once you've inserted your walls, you can select those intersections and say, I want to change the style of configuration for that particular corner configuration or that intersection. So that's something that's done in the drawing after you've inserted your walls. The infill configuration is just going to define how you want your walls to be framed. So we're using a 16-inch on-center double top plate. We're also using a blocked wall system here. So I'm going to see the blocking inside of my wall. I can also just say, I don't want blocking. I just want to do a 16 inches on center double top plate, and that will remove the blocking out. So I'm not going to see all that extra blocking in my design. So again, you can adjust this. You can add to this list. If you want a new infill configuration, you can create your own and edit any one of these. Some of the other ones that you're going to see are going to have actual members assigned to them. And these are going to be used more for anybody that is creating a design that's going to be sitting right on top of a concrete wall or on top of a concrete floor. You're going to want to make sure that the bottom plate is pressure treated. So since you can't have a separate member, if you use the wall, the member associated to the wall, then it's always going to use the same member that's assigned to that wall. So here we're doing the same thing we did with our headers. We're just saying, I want my bottom plate to use an exact member. So I want to use a 2x6 treated plate material from my member library instead of using whatever my stud is using, which is going to be assigned based off the wall properties. So in this case, what we're saying here is if I know I'm going to be drawing with a 2x6 wall in my design, and I know it's going to be sitting on top of a concrete floor, then I'm probably going to want to make sure that I change this to be a 2x6 pressure treated bottom plate. So that way it's always going to use that bottom plate material for that wall. I'm just going to go back and just say I want that to be just the double top plate, and I'm going to say okay. And then we also have the framing rule. And again, this just determines how the wall is going to be framed. So you can start from the bottom left. You have a couple of different options in here: bottom left, bottom right, top left. Again, just the orientation of how you want this to be framed. I'm just going to say cancel on this. I'll say OK to that. And you'll also notice that we have the framing option specified for each location itself. And we do that by design because we want to make sure that the framing options are controlled per location. So if you're designing a building that is a two-story building, you're going to be carrying a larger load on the ground floor than you will on the second floor, because you're going to be carrying the second floor and the roof. So your header information on your ground floor is going to be larger than the headers on your second floor. So by being able to specify and adjust these independently per location is something that you're going to want to take advantage of. Same with how you want things to be used for your infill configuration. So if I'm again designing on a slab on grade, but I'm designing a two-story house, my infill configuration for my ground floor is going to use a 16 inches on center with a 2x6 bottom plate, but the walls on my second floor are not going to need that pressure treated bottom plate. So I'll be able to select a different infill configuration for the second floor walls. Again, just a note here, everything that I'm talking about can be set up in a template, which we've talked about in previous classes. So if you design in a certain manner for most of your designs, then you can set this all up in a template. So that way when you start a new drawing, you can use that specific template and your building locations will be set up for you. One of the other things I wanted to talk about in our building locations is interactive versus independent properties. So items that are interactive will update previously inserted elements when you change their values in the dialog box. So for example, raising the floor level of your ground floor by 6 inches will raise the entire building location and any higher building location by 6 inches. So as an example, if I take this ground floor and I say, let's just make it 1 foot, and I click out of that dialog box, I'm going to get a message that says, do you want to update the floor levels affected by this current modification as well? And I'm going to say yes. And if you watch this 10-foot 4 5/8, it's going to reduce the height. So it automatically does that math for us. So that floor level is a byproduct of an interactive property. Items that are independent will not update previously inserted elements when you change their values in the dialog box. So for example, raising the wall height of your ground floor by 6 inches will not raise the height of all your previously inserted walls associated with that building location. So this change will only apply to walls inserted after the change. So if I look at my wall heights, my ceiling heights, my head heights, those are all going to be independent values. So if I've already drawn my walls in, inserted some windows and inserted a ceiling, and they use these values, if I adjust these values now, anything new that I insert will take that change, but anything that was already drawn in that building location will not. I'll have to manually elevate that up. And that brings me to another point that I like to stress when using our building locations. Whatever the majority of your building location values are, so let's say the majority of your design is going to be 8-foot 1 1/8 wall heights with 8-foot ceiling heights and 6'8" head heights, but I know I'm going to have a great room in my design that's going to have some taller walls, so the head heights are going to be a little bit taller and the ceiling height is going to be taller. Keep this as the value of whatever the majority is. So I would draw everything out with this value. I'm just going to cancel this, draw everything out where I want everything to go. And I'm just going to draw a quick building here. I can add all that in. But now that I've added all of these in, if I select all similar and I go into their properties and I select top and bottom and I look at the level, they're all using the 8-foot 1 1/8 height. So I can now go in and say, well, these 3 walls are going to constitute my great room, so I want these walls to be higher. So I can select those walls individually, right-click, Properties, and I can change the level to be 10 feet high and say OK. And now just those walls in my design will be 10 feet high and they'll be taller. When I add in windows and doors in my design, they'll all insert at that 6'8" height. So if I look at this in our 3D view that we just added in, all of our windows are at that height, but I can select one of the windows that's going to be in that great room area, and I can elevate it from 6'8" to 9 foot or whatever the height is that I want for that particular room. So whatever the majority is of your design, use that as your default value. But in the drawing itself, you can adjust later on. So you can edit those values after they've been inserted. So next we're going to be looking at adding in a new location. So we're going to click on the Add Location button in our Building Locations dialog box. So right now I have the ground floor selected, and I'm just going to select the Add Location option. And this will bring up the new location dialog box. And you have 2 options to help you with your settings here. So we have a calculate from existing location. So this is going to calculate the heights of the new location based on an existing location. The location calculator from existing dialog box has pre-populated values based on a location that you select. This makes it easier to create your new location based on an already established value. So if I select the create location from existing location and I say OK, it will bring up the location calculator from existing. And right now, since I had ground floor selected, it's going to use ground floor as my calculate from location option. In here, you're going to see that a couple of the values are grayed out. So you can see top of wall is grayed out, floor level is grayed out, top of wall is grayed out. Because we've already defined that we're using the ground floor as our base point, these values aren't going to be editable because they're going to change based on what we make adjustments to. So as an example, if I'm adding in a location above my ground floor, we have some values that we can edit here. So you can fill in the values for your wall height, ceiling height, and head height in here. So if they're going to differ from what the ground floor is, then you can make adjustments here. But we can also take into consideration the floor level. And the floor level value will allow you to add in the thickness of the floor system that you anticipate using for this design. And this calculator will use that information to determine the floor level value for you. So if I know I'm going to be adding in a 2x10 floor system in here, then I'm going to make my sheathing, I'm just going to go 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to say that this is going to be 9.25, and I'm not going to have a sill plate. And you'll notice that these values start to change. So the floor level is now 10 foot 4 5/8, and the top of wall has also increased because I've added in a thicker, or I've added in an actual thickness for that floor. So this is a great way to adjust and add in new locations. And we're going to call this second floor 2, just so we have something different. And we want to make sure we give it that location name because that's what's going to show up in our list down here. And then we can simply say, OK. And you'll now see our new floor level has been added in, and we can see those values have been adjusted for us. So being able to create those new locations by using a previously defined location is a great way to stack locations if you're going up in your design. The other option when we select the add location is the calculate from grade. And this is going to calculate the heights of the new location based on calculations from grade. The location calculator from grade dialog box has pre-populated values based on the grade. So if I select calculate from grade and I say OK, here is where I can start to add in new values. So maybe I want to do a detached shed or workshop or a garage in my design, but I want it to be on its own location, I can go in here and say garage. So again, I'm giving it a name so I know what it is in my building locations dropdown. And then I can go through and say, well, where do I want these values to be in relation to? So again, I'm giving it a name. I'm going to make sure I have my wall heights, ceiling heights, and head heights all defined for that particular location. But then I'm going to change my floor level from grade. And this is where I'm going to say, well, this is going to be a slab on grade construction. So this one's only going to be 4 inches from the top of the grade. So again, top of grade to top of floor. We're doing a slab that's going to be 4 inches thick. I want that value to be 4 inches. And I say, okay. And it now creates a new location called garage that's separate from my house. I can draw on this location. I can make adjustments to that particular location independently. And again, you'll have all of the different options that we were working with earlier for that specific location. So that covers pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about in today's class. So I'm going to open up the questions section. So if you do happen to have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, please feel free to go ahead and enter those in, and I will do my best to answer those for you. While you're typing out those questions, I am just going to go through and do a quick review of everything that we talked about today. So in today's class, we went through and we've learned how to adjust our building locations before starting to build with our projects in Envisioneer. The building locations dialog box is probably one of the most important dialog boxes in the software just because it controls how your building is going to be stacked on top of itself. Some points to remember: that the building location settings dialog box dictate the number of your building locations in your project to a maximum of 999 and the name of each of those locations. It also controls the relationship of different building locations, levels or stories to one another and to the grade. The wall, floor, and ceiling heights of each building location can also be defined. The height at which your elements such as doors, windows, and openings are placed into your model. And then we also have the framing settings for load-bearing and non-load-bearing walls in your project. We have interactive properties in the building locations, which will update items previously inserted in the model when you change their values in the dialog box, again, such as your floor level and your framing options. And then we also have independent properties in the building locations dialog that will not update items previously inserted in your model when you change their value in the dialog box. So again, that's going to be your head heights, ceiling heights, and wall heights. And again, just to reiterate on that, if I take a look at my ground floor and I look here and I can see that the double top plate, I'm using a 16 inches on center double top plate with a blocked wall. So if I say okay to all that, and I look at that in a rendered, in a framing view, and if I want to change this and say, well, I don't want blocking on these walls anymore, I've changed my mind, it doesn't require it, whatever the case may be, you can go back in here. And this is an example of the interactive property where I can say, I want to change that for the entire ground floor and say, I don't want any blocking. And it will go through and update all of those walls for you so that the blocking is now removed. Okay. One of the other options that I like to point out too is, so just like we can elevate openings up or down, we can adjust the wall heights or elevate the ceilings up or down, we can also independently select walls and adjust the information for those particular walls. So as an example, if I turn on framing mode here, I can select this wall, and this wall, and I can say, well, these walls are 10 feet high. They're going to require blocking. So I can select just those 3 walls, right-click Properties, and in here under Infill, I can say, don't refer to location. I want to use my own infill configuration for here, and this is where I want to use that blocked wall. And I can say OK, and then say OK, and now just those walls will be blocked and everything else will not have blocking. And the same is going to be true for any opening. So maybe the majority of my openings, I can get away with just a 2x6 or 2x8 header. But over here in this one, I want to use a specific header configuration. Then this is where I can specify that I want that to use a 2x10. And it will increase the size of that one opening and only that opening to be a 2x10. And I'm just going to turn that into a rendered outline so that you can see the difference in those. So just like you're able to adjust independently your elevation of your elements, you can also control using the framing mode the differences of materials being used for your infills and your openings themselves. So one question that I have in here is, how do you build a house with back half at grade and the rest of the home at 32-inch concrete block height? The home has a 32-inch block around the entire home, but the back 2 rooms are on slab. So what you can do there is you can have a location. Let me see if I'm understanding this. So the 32-inch concrete block is going to have a wood floor, I'm assuming, and then the back half of the home is going to have, the back 2 rooms are going to be on a slab. So you can do that by going in, and you can set up your own foundation levels if you want to. So you would be able to, and I'm just going to turn this off, so we're back into display all but framing. So let's say, I'm just trying to think here. Let's say we want to take this design that we've already added in, and I'm just going to change this up, and we're going to have this back half of the house is going to be the slab. This is going to be on my block wall here. And then there's going to be a wall right down the middle. That's going to be my load-bearing wall. So I'm just going to drop in a wall interior. I'm just going to drop in a 2x6 interior load-bearing wall. And we'll say that those are the 2 rooms in the back of the house that we're going to be working with. So I'm just going to add a wall in between those, and we'll stretch this out a little bit more to make those bigger. So right now I have my sections of my house. So this half is going to be built on a 32-inch block wall with a structural floor or some kind of floor in it, while this half of the house is going to be just a 4-inch slab. So in your building locations, this is where you need to make your decision on, well, how do I want this to be represented? So what's going to be easier for what I'm trying to design here? I can say that I want it to be 4 inches, and then I can adjust everything down from there. Or I can say I want this to be where the wall is going to be 32 inches. So I'm going to say you're probably going to need another 2x10. So we'll probably do, we'll just do 10 inches here. And we'll just say 10 inches. So I'm just basically saying the thickness of the floor is what I'm going to use here for right now. And I'm going to say OK and yes to all of those. I am going to delete these locations out, and we're just going to go in. One other thing, you can't delete a location that's current. So right now this arrow marks a current location. So now I can delete that second floor 2 out, and I can delete garage out. So I'm back to my defaults here. And then I can say OK to that. Sorry, I also want to make this negative 32, and this is also going to be 32, like so. So that's giving me my height for my block wall. That's what I'm defining there. And then I can say OK, and now I can go through, and I'd like to use tools that are available to me. And in this case, I'm just going to use the Floor and Foundation Builder Wizard to create my foundation. And I'm going to say next. I'm going to say foundation, next. I'm just going to use a wall and a footing, and I want that to be, I'm not sure if you specified an actual wall thickness, but I'm just going to go in and say blocked wall, and I'm just going to do a concrete concrete block. I'm just going to do a 10-inch concrete block, and we'll say okay. And then footing, I'm just going to do a 1 foot by 1 foot 8, and then we're going to say next, next, and finish. And what that does is on my foundation, it adds in that blocked wall. I can take that now and stretch it all the way to there to bring that block wall to that area. I can add in my floor wherever I want now for this particular area. So I'm going to see my block wall underneath that. And then over here is where I would be able to now add in my slab wherever I want that to go. So on here, I can go back into ground floor, and then I can add in a slab that sits in this area. And then I can adjust the slope of the terrain if I need to again make those adjustments. Or I could easily just make this 4 inches and say okay. And I would then need to make some adjustments to this location. So I would need to go add in 6 inches. So we're going to be minus 3'4" because I want to, and no, I don't want to adjust that because this is going to be the level that's going to be on the slab or on the slab itself. So I would need to add in my floor by picking points, and I can just select my 4-inch slab and I can drop that floor in. And again, this is just a basic model here, so I'm not being completely accurate with this, but I'm going to say that this is where that floor is going to go. And when we look at that in our 3D view, I'm going to select these walls here. And these walls are not going to need that drop exterior face because it's sitting on the slab. These walls are also going to need a pressure treated bottom plate. So I'm going to need to go in and adjust those as well. But again, when we look at that in our 3D view, we're going to see our slab here. And we can see how that's going to look. I'm just going to get rid of the and delete. So now we're not going to see that hardwood floor on top of that slab. And then out here, we can go through and we'll now see that area where I can add in my structural floor. And I would then go in and say structural floor and say by perimeter. I'm just going to do a 2x10. I'm going to drop that structural floor system in. I'm going to zoom in on a corner. I did it by perimeter just because our design here is pretty simple. So I didn't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So I'm just going to stretch this back like so. And now what you're going to see is your structural floor that's going to meet up. It's going to be at pretty much the same height as that slab itself, but then that structural floor is going to sit on top of the stem wall or whatever you want to call it, crawl space. Under your view filter, under floors, we're going to change that to be, I'm just going to turn the visibility of the joists on so we can see how that looks. So I think that is what you were asking. Let me know if that is what you were referring to. And if not, I can adjust and go from there. Perfect. So again, it's just going to make determine on how you want that to be drawn out. What's the best way of doing it? If the majority is going to be slab on grade, then I would make your building locations that 4-inch value, and then you can adjust the other walls accordingly. If the majority of the design is going to be built up on that stem wall, then make that the height. But again, you can do it either way. Both would work for you. All right, well, I'll pause here for just another second just to see if there's any follow-up questions. While I'm doing that, like I mentioned at the beginning of the class, I will be sending out a PDF and an email for you, so that way you have some documentation to refer back to. And it's going to contain everything that we've talked about today. So if you do happen to have any questions while working with any of those, while working with that PDF, you can contact our support department and they'll be able to help you out with any questions you might have as well. So another one here, totally off topic. And how do you view the first floor only and second floor only in 3D mode? I can't find a video on that. So if you've added in a first floor and a second floor, so I'll just go in here just because it is kind of related to what we're talking about. I'll just select these walls, select all similar, right click, and I'm just going to say duplicate to locations. I'm going to say second floor, and I'll say no, I don't want to delete everything on the second floor. So if I look at this in a 3D view from the outside, I can see both the ground floor and the second floor. And if I'm understanding your question correctly, in a 3D view, you only want to see the ground floor, not the second floor. Is that correct? Before I continue on? Yes, okay, perfect. So all you would have to do here is in your view filter, you have the option to go through, and here we have an all locations option. So if I uncheck all locations, I can select second floor and I can say display none. And just by doing that and saying display none, it turns everything off on the second floor. And when I look at that in a 3D view, it will turn everything off on that second floor for me. So again, just underneath your view filter. So again, if you like to use the buttons like I do, it's down here. You got the view filter. If you like to use the menu, you can go to view filter, and then uncheck all locations, select the location you want, select display none. So again, if we only want to see the ground floor, I can say display none to the foundation. And now I won't see anything on the foundation in my 3D view either. If you want to see everything, you can just go back in here and just say display all, and it will turn everything back on and you'll see everything again. No problem. Glad I was able to help you out there. Perfect. Well, that seems to be all the questions. So again, I'll just pause here for just a second just to make sure that there isn't any follow-up or anyone else typing in a question. And again, I'll just reiterate that I will be sending out this email as soon as I have done this class, so you should be getting that shortly. Perfect. Well, I do want to thank everybody for attending today. I do look forward to speaking with you all again very soon. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.